All right. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? How is it going? I am no one. And I was asked yesterday if I was going to cover this article from Matt Ferrar. And I said no, I wasn't going to do it for a video. And I found myself doing that a lot recently for ESO content. A handful of times I've thought about doing a video about ESO for the last year, and I've just decided not to do it. And I realized that at this point in time, I don't want to cover ESO content anymore. I don't. And this will be the last video I cover for ESO going forward. And I feel like I owe it to you guys, the guys that, my channel started off as an ESO channel. For years, I only did ESO content, and this is a big change. And I figured you guys should know, and you should be informed that you will not be seeing any more of this going forward. So you're going to see why. I'm going to explain why in this video so that you guys understand where I'm coming from. We agree or disagree, the way it's always been, that's fine. This is where I'm coming from. This is my perspective on things. You at least will have that understanding, and you can make your decisions going forward. But we're going to cover a lot. We're going to cover a lot in this video. I'm going to make it as good as possible for you guys. We're going to go out correctly. And yes, I do have the flu. I do not feel good. I did not sleep very well last night. I have had the cold sweats. I have been shivering nonstop and sweating at the same time. It's been fucking fantastic. But just like Michael Jordan's flu game in the 1990s, I am going to flu game this. And if you think about it, what I am doing right now, making a YouTube video and talking to you guys, is even more impressive than what Michael Jordan did in the NBA Finals. That's just objectively fact. So let's dive into it. Anyway, I saw this article posted yesterday from Matt Ferrar, and I was like, oh, what happened? Let's read it. And I'm not going to read all of it to you guys, okay? I'll provide a link in the description. You guys can feel free to check it out. This is their update on what 2024 is and 2025 going forward. They're turning the page on chapters. Chapters will no longer exist in ESO. They're now introducing seasons. Seasonal content. You know what that means? Season passes. Woo! And then a new focus on change and experimentation. This is the juicy part. We've been hearing from you, the community, that we need to experiment more, to shake things up and not be so predictable. The game needs new and different types of content, and for long-standing feedback to be addressed. We have already started on some ideas that will be tested in 2025. These systems and ideas will be clearly marked as experiments in patch notes and are ideas that may or may not be fleshed out into full game systems. With our new focus on breaking up content into seasons and away from years, it gives us time to do these experiments and changes. Here are some of the ideas we are working on, some of which you may see on the live servers as tests in 2025 and beyond. Some of these will be tests and some will be improvements based on player feedback. Number one, we need to seriously address Cyrodiil performance. Our ambitious goal is to return it to the concurrency levels we supported in 2014. Nothing like going back 10 years ago to the glory days, right boys? So we will be experimenting with a Cyrodiil campaign where all classes will have PvP specific and more performance skills that replace the standard player skills, with the expectation that we can support more players per campaign. 2, increasing the difficulty of standard overworld combat. 3, improving the overall feel of combat with animation, special effects, and potentially audio work. 4, experimenting with more zones like Craglorn, although not as large in area or scope, created exclusively for high-end group and soft group content with associated gear chase. 5, adding and refining tools to make guild recruitment, interaction, and management easier and more logical. 6, we have many more ideas here, and of course, we are listening to you and will be coming up with new ideas based on your feedback. Concentrating on new and returning user experience. I'm going to make it better for you. Continuing to tell great stories. Every story's been great. Every story will be great. Every story going forward, great, great, great. They're all great. The end. Feel free to read it if you guys want. This entire part right here, all of this has so many things to talk about, and I'm going to attempt to address them in this video, and I may bounce around. There's so much to cover, and I feel like I miss so many things. So we're going to try it again. As a whole, this all sounds good, right, guys? Like, this all sounds fantastic. The thing is when it comes from Matt Ferrar, this stuff always sounds fantastic. I did a video a couple years ago. I'll provide a link in the description for that as well if you want to go check it out. I went back. He did a post like this back in 2022 when I was still playing. And he made a post about how they are going to re-architect their servers. And they're going to introduce multi-threading, and they're going to rewrite multiple lines of code. They're going to go through their database and rewrite multiple lines of code, and this will have a drastic impact on Cyrodiil performance. They're going to address all these things. They're going to fix these things, and it's going to be great. And not only are they going to fix these things, and we're going to see a dramatic shift and performance improvements, they're going to provide periodic updates to everybody as to when these things are happening. And so I don't think I ever did a video on this, but here's what happened. After about 9 months of them saying they're going to provide periodic updates, I asked, hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with this multi-threading and re-architecture / code rewrite that you were talking about? And this is what Matt Ferrar wrote back in July of 2023. He said, it is approaching mid-year and time to give an update on how our multi-threading work is going. If you remember, back at the end of last year, I gave the news that we would be performing an ongoing series of server work aimed at spreading out ESO processes across more CPU cores, with the goal that it would result in a substantial increase in server performance. Over Update 37 launched back in March and in Update 38, we have completed some of this work. Initial metrics, however, show that these steps in multi-threading are not having as much of a performance improvement as desired. And so we had to roll back one of the process changes because it introduced an unacceptable level of instability. Fortunately, the recent upgrade to server hardware has resulted in more customer-facing server performance improvements than any of our multi-threading work in all public realms where we've completed the work. Xbox EU is still scheduled for later this year. In fact, the recent White Strikes Mayhem event in May showed just how much fun ESO PvP is with the new hardware in place. I'm sorry, this part right here. In fact, the recent White Strikes Mayhem event in May showed just how much fun ESO PvP is with the new hardware in place. Hardware did make the game better. You know what else makes the game better? When you reallocate server load to PvP, like what they do every fucking year with Mid-Year Mayhem. And so to obfuscate the fact that performance is better during Mid-Year Mayhem, it's just a lie. I'm sorry. There's no other way to put it around this. Everybody knows that they clearly make performance better during Mid-Year Mayhem. Do you think all of a sudden spinning up more servers of Cyrodiil and it magically working better for the last 6 or 7 years of Mid-Year Mayhem, you think that's magically by design that all of a sudden more people equals better performance? No, they've always put more investment into Mid-Year Mayhem. They always have. And so he's sitting here telling you, yeah, it's the new architecture, guys. It's a new architecture that made White Strikes Mayhem event better. That's just what you got to believe because I'm writing it. All this to say, we continue to look for areas to spread process to optimize our server CPU capabilities. Please remember, we must be very, very careful when making changes of this complexity to ESO's massive codebase. However, we will continue to dedicate resources to keep analyzing and looking for ways to utilize multi-threading to improve server performance, and we will update everyone on any successes that we have when we find solutions. So, the TLDR is back in 2022. They had this big, massive plan to rewrite server code, millions upon millions of lines. All of a sudden, that doesn't exist anymore. It's just multi-threading. We're not doing that, guys. And guess what? The multi-threading didn't do anything. So all of this big hopes and hoopla and massive dreams that Matt Ferrar wrote back in 2022, nothing came of it. And some of it was so bad, they had to roll it back because it didn't work very well. And if you go back and you watch that video that I posted in 2022, I did some research on Matt Ferrar posts. Did you know in 2016 that he wrote a post like this, that how they were going to relook at Cyrodiil performance? Did you know that in 2018, he did the exact same thing and they're going to relook at Cyrodiil performance? Do you know that in 2019, that ESO wrote an article saying that in 2020 is going to be the year of ESO performance and they're going to make these substantial improvements? Did you know that in 2021, they introduced hardware architecture to address these things and it went so well that they had to have Matt Ferrar come out and lie about rewriting server code in 2022. So when we have this history, 8 fucking years of history of them addressing server performance for Cyrodiil, when I see this, color me a bit skeptical, guys. Maybe I just don't believe it this time. Maybe I just don't believe that this is a truth that is going to happen. That's just where I'm coming from. If you go back and you look at what he's written, it's always puff pieces. You know what I imagine in my head? I imagine he thinks we're all 2-year-olds. And every time something bad happens in the game, he has to come out with those plastic keys. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's the plastic keys for toddlers. And they have to jangle the keys in front of us like, hey, guys, we're going to do all these cool fucking things. It's going to be fucking great. Look at the keys. Ignore all the bad shit that's happening. Ignore all the bad stuff. We got these cool keys that are coming up. It's going to be wonderful. Meanwhile, don't ask us about the keys in 6 months because we're just going to let it slip under the rug and we're not going to talk about it. Definitely not going to provide the periodic updates that we said we're going to. We have to be poked and prodded about it in order to get something. And then we're going to lie to your fucking face about it. That's where it's at. I'm sorry. So on bullet 1, I am skeptical. Yeah, I am very skeptical about this. With that being said, this is exactly what I would do. And the reason I say that is because we have had moments in the past with better performance. I remember way back in the day when they made the Champion Point 2.0 change, I forget what developer it was, they were talking and they made a comment about how the CP 1.0 system was running a lot of checks in the background. And basically they had all these passives that required checks to be running nonstop. And so if you got 30 people in an area where they were all running these different checks to see if these passives were being met, it would bog down the server. And so they streamlined the CP system in order to make it better. And server performance did get better in that regard. We all know that over the years, no CP has always had better performance than CP. It makes sense, right? Even with the CP 2.0 changes, no CP has always been better. It has always been better. It has always had better performance than Champion Point systems, because the minute you get 50 to 100 people in an area, a few more checks on a system is going to bog things down. If you play your game, you would understand this. And so when you go look at 4 or 5 years ago on PCNA and PCEU, the most populated servers were no CP for that reason. And I would hop on and I'd be like, I came from Xbox. I was an Xbox pleb. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go do this Champion Point area. And it was never as populated as no CP because everybody that was on PC knew better. They knew that performance was better in those areas. And so you would have fully pop locked no CP campaigns. Now, what did the developers do about that? Well, a few years ago, they decided to wipe all proc sets out of no CP, which, wasn't necessarily a bad idea, because I think proc sets also incorporate checks. If you look at something like Marisbalm, for instance, I noticed a substantial dip in performance when Marisbalm was introduced, because what does it do? Similar to CP 1.0, it's constantly running checks on your character to see when you're taking damage. And every time you take damage, it had to proc a heal. And if you took so much damage, it had to proc a burst heal. It had to purge all dots off of you. It had to purge all negative effects off of you. And so it was constantly running these checks when you were in combat. Now imagine a situation where Marisbalm is so powerful that everybody's running it, and you get into an area with 30 people and you constantly have these Marisbalm damage checks running in the background. Would that also bog down server performance? I noticed a substantial change in performance when Marisbalm was introduced for that reason. And so when you look at checks being run, is it just champion points that are the issue? Or is it checks via proc sets? Is it checks via pull sets? Because pulls need requirements, right? Like if a set is going to pull you in, you need to be, if you don't want to get pulled in, you need to be CC immune. So it has to run a check to see if you have CC immunity or not. If it's blockable, it needs to run a check to see if you are blocking or not. And so every single proc set has these types of requirements. If you're doing a dot on somebody, it is running constant checks to see what your resistances are, because resistances can change based off of what other bonuses you're getting from other people in the area, your major minor protection buffs, stuff like this. So it's constantly running to see every single dot that happens is running a server check in the background. And so when you introduce more damage over time effects via dot sets, when you introduce more proc flat damage sets with more animations, when you introduce more pull sets, and when you introduce more healing sets, it drastically impacts server performance. It really does. And so when you look at these things, when you look at a no CP campaign, removing proc sets would be a good idea. However, the issue they have is they just decided to introduce 6 sets into the game and leave it be. And they didn't go back to balance it or adjust it or whatever. And so this entire PCNA, PCEU, fully pop-locked no CP campaign turned into a fucking ghost town, because literally the damage sets didn't outdo the defensive sets and nobody died there. Everybody would just run the defensive sets because they were more powerful. They understood that they were more powerful, and it was just like, okay, well, I guess we just stalemate. And nobody wants to play a PvP game where everybody stalemates. So everybody left and they went to an area where the proc sets exist. And so if you look at what they could have done with no CP, if you saw that they could have jumped to the conclusion, yeah, proc sets are creating lag issues. Ball groups running checks on smart healing is creating lag issues. CP is creating performance issues. We could create a world, a Cyrodiil environment where there's no CP, There's no proc sets. We're going to have to buff damage sets for sure. So this 675 weapon damage, that's not going to exist anymore. We're going to have to introduce 1,000 weapon damage sets. We're going to have to do 1,200 weapon damage sets in order for people to have the damage in order to kill each other and not rely on proc sets in order to kill each other. We're going to have to introduce these things and we're going to have to rebalance that. Did they do any of that? No. They just let PC, no CP, PC, NA, and EU die. They just let it die. And people moved on, and they haven't addressed it since. And so when they have an answer in front of their face, they haven't looked at it. And they've been looking at Cyrodiil performance for 9 years. So I don't believe that they're going to address it going forward. This is what I would do, though. Everything that I just said is what I would do. And so maybe there's a glimmer of hope there. Second thing, there's so much here, and I am sorry, but increase the difficulty of standard overworld combat. I've been talking about this for years. Overworld content in ESO is so bad. It is so mind-numbingly easy, and all of it is easy. All of it is. And I've never understood why you introduce all these worlds and you can't have like a 70-30 situation, right? Or like a 60-20-20 situation where 60% of it is mind-numbingly easy, 20% of it is a little bit more difficult, and then 20% of it is actually hard. It requires a group, or it requires some actual skill to pull off. I've never understood why they couldn't separate those things. I never understood why it had to be 100% easy everywhere. Every single chapter they introduce, everything's fucking easy. It's easy everywhere. You go through, you like, the story isn't interesting, nearly as interesting, when everything's so easy. And this is stuff that was brought up in 2019 and 2020. You have all this content that's literally catered to casuals. Like, you're introducing, like, retelling Skyrim and retelling Morrowind and retelling all these things because you're trying to pull in from the crowd, the Elder Scrolls crowd, so that they will come in and play your game and they will casually run through that specific content. I totally get that. But players that play your game every single day, that love your game, have been talking about this for years. And so when I see this, why are they finally doing a 180 on this? Is it because they no longer have easy chapters to do? Is it because they finally realized, getting all this voice acting, paying all this voice acting to get people to come in and be different characters is no longer profitable for us anymore. So we can no longer do this monetization policy. We're not pulling in the players we were pulling before when we were doing Morrowind and shit. And so this is no longer profitable for us. And we're moving on to seasons so that we can milk our current player base of their money instead of catering to fucking casuals for 10 years. That's what I see. And so when I see this, I see them going, okay, we finally recognize that we have this core group of players that we've been ignoring for 10 years. We've been ignoring this entire player base for 10 years. But now that we're changing our monetization policy, we now realize that in order to make money, we now have to finally make our core group of players happy. And so we are going to finally eventually look into addressing these things. And the problem is, guys, it's obvious that the developers don't play this game at a high-end level. The vast majority of them don't. They've been catering to casual players and casual gameplay for 10 years. Do you think they're magically going to be able to flip the switch and be able to figure out what high-end game players want out of content? Do you think that's a thing? No, absolutely not. Improving the overall feel of combat, yada, yada, yada. Experimenting with more zones created exclusively for high-end group and soft group content. Once again, they're shifting their entire monetization process. And the shitty part about this is, once again, I talked about this a few years ago. If you ignore your high-end player base, if you ignore your players that are paying for ESO Plus, if you ignore the players that are doing high-end rating and endgame PvP and stuff like that, you no longer have as large of a loyal player base. You see everybody slowly leaving ESO. The content creators that existed in ESO 3-4 years ago is drastically different from the ESO content creators that exist now, because so many players just don't want to play anymore because they're not being listened to, they're not being heard. And I still don't believe that, like, even if all these things happen, even if they do a 180 and all these things work out well, I don't believe they have a development team in place to make these changes good for long term, because they haven't shown that to be the case for like the last 8 or 9 years. But my point is the game has been around for 10 years and they've been having a 10-year celebration. And so they posted this on December 6th, and it says, please read this update on our 2025 ESO 10-year anniversary celebration in-person event plans. Earlier this year, we had the great pleasure of meeting so many of you in Amsterdam when we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of The Elder Scrolls Online. At the time, we had also planned a North American gathering for 2025. While we continue to celebrate a decade of ESO with in-game content, activities, rewards, and more, we will no longer be hosting an additional large-scale in-person event in North America. This was a difficult decision to make. We love hanging with the ESO family, and we can plan to continue holding smaller gatherings in various global locations, including meetups at industry events. Meanwhile, our focus, as always, continues to be on the game itself, on delivering fun, engaging, welcoming, challenging content for long-time and new players alike. From all of us at ZeniMax Online Studios, thank you for being such a dedicated part of the ESO community. I'm sorry, but there's some times that where profitability of an event shouldn't matter so much, right? And I would think that a 10-year anniversary of a game that has been out for 10 years, regardless of what I think of it right now, regardless of what I think of it, I think doing in-person events for players that have stuck through it is the quintessential point of community, right? Like, you guys have been sticking through it thick and thin. You guys have been focused. You guys have loved this game for 10 years, and we want to celebrate this with you. And so we are going to do an in-person event to meet up with our players, to celebrate the fact that we've been doing this for a fucking decade. That's a big deal. My thoughts on the game aside, that is a big deal, right? And that is something that when you take millions and millions of players' dollars when you take millions of their dollars and you can't fork over a little bit of money for an in-person event, does that sound like community to you? Does that sound like a game that gives a shit about community? Does this sound at all like what they're talking about? No, absolutely not. And so this is just one thing. I'm sure this was a money situation where they're like, yeah, it's not worth the ROI is not worth it. This is probably what they're going to do. And I made a comment about this on Twitter. One of the issues ESO has had is they rather pay money to bring in other communities than build on the one they have. It leads to a more casual following and less diehards. This is just an example of something that they have always done, in my opinion. They don't cater to their fan base. They've had lots of streamers come up, lots of content creators come up through their game. And anytime somebody provides some sort of constructive criticism, they wash it away and they go into their own echo chamber and they ignore it. They only want to hear positive things. And so when you look at, the current stream team as an example, most of them are constant yes men. That's just the way it is. If you want to make the stream team for ESO, you have to say yes to everything. You can never be critical about anything. And that leads to an unhealthy game. You literally have developers hearing that everything they're doing is good, nothing is bad, everything they're doing is right. Anybody that's being critical is just a hater. And what ends up happening is you have loyal players that are saying, hey, this is a severe problem with your game, like it needs to be adjusted. They get ignored, and players get tired of being ignored. And so then you have diehards that leave, and then you have diehards that go, and that community erodes away, and it erodes, and it erodes, and they don't do things to listen to that community. Like, I'm not talking about the people that shit on the game. I'm talking about people that provide constructive criticism. That's two different things. And what ends up happening is you have this bigger following narrowed down to a more narrower following. And so this is just a microcosm of, in my opinion, of what the game has done for the last 10 years. They've never cared about community. They've never cared about what this stuff does. And so when I see this post that came out on December 6th, and when I see this director's letter where they're all of a sudden going to listen to your feedback, I'm sorry. Matt Ferrar has lied multiple times in the past about this on multiple different posts. It's been proven that he just lies about these things. When they don't hold an event for people, it's obvious that they just don't care. They just don't. And I'm not saying this is the developer's fault or anything like that. It's whoever's calling these shots' fault. They don't understand that, like, this is what pisses players off. You can't fork over a little bit of money from your fucking crown crates to afford an in-person event. Like, what the fuck's wrong with you? That's crazy. Anyway, that's what I see here, right? Like, they're all of a sudden pivoting because this is how they're going to have to change their model to be more profitable. They have to not pay for actors. They have to not pay for high-end game chapters. And so what are they going to do? They're going to lean on their current player base that they have, and they're going to try to make stuff to keep them playing for as long as possible. And they're going to try to make that profitable now because nothing else is currently working. Now, I said it before oftentimes Matt Ferrar does these posts after some negative feedback has happened. Sure, he does it at the end of the year, but for whatever reason, the last two big posts that he's done that I have covered has come after like the wah 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 event that happened with I forget his name, Rich and his wife, like that entire situation. He wrote a big post after that. There was another post that happened after a very bad patch where they didn't listen to the endgame community, and the endgame community was like, hey, you're making a really shit patch, you need to make all these adjustments, you need to make these improvements because it's going to make the game worse, and they ignored them and incorporated it anyways, and everybody left. He made a big post after that too, and how things were going to get better now, everything was going to be hunky-dory. So when I saw this, I was like, okay, well, what's happened recently that he might want to get out in front of? What is he doing what is he dangling his keys in front of you at to distract you from? And first thing I thought of was the Battleground event. When you look at the Battleground event, the long story short, ESO finally did PvP content, which is fantastic. That's not the content I would have done. If they continue to do PvP content, I hope they branch into a few different areas. 8v8s, I think, is very, very narrow of a scope for players. I think you could have done something that would have been more appealing to more players in general. But regardless, doing PvP content is great. I'm not going to, bite the hand that feeds me, I guess, if I was still playing. Something's better than nothing. It's just, I would have gone in a different direction. Regardless, they did a big event and they brought in Cypher PK. Once again, an example of a player that used to be here, left to go somewhere else, created his own community, and now they pay him to bring his community over to ESO rather than, building up the community. Like, they could have had him for free if they listened to his feedback and listened to stuff, but instead now they pay him to come in with his community because, that's what he did. It's a microcosm of what's happened in the last 10 years. That's highly amusing to me. Cypher, keep getting fucking paid. I think it's hilarious. I'm not criticizing it at all. Anyways, Battlegrounds event, Cypher, other PvPers, other things happened. The lead combat dev is in there with Cypher PK. And what happens? Well, he shows his whole fucking ass. He just bare ass shows that he doesn't have a concept for how core basic mechanics of ESO combat functions, which I know. I read the comments from the developers. I read comments from players. Oh yeah, Brian Wheeler's not good at PvP. Like, that's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. I agree with you. I 100% agree with the developers and the players that say that. That's not the issue at all. The issue is that he doesn't understand basic principles like heaviest attacks restore stamina. It looked like he never played the game. I've seen players with 20 to 30 hours of combat in ESO know more and play better than what Brian Wheeler did. And this is the lead combat dev. This is a guy that should be in there testing things daily at work, like figuring stuff out. He should have core fundamental principle understanding of how these characters work because he's the lead combat dev. And it didn't look like it at all. It looked like he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And the way he talked, it looked like he hadn't even been playing for 20 hours. He was running a trolley tank build. One of the worst fucking builds I've ever seen. Literally running Troll King in 2024. Anybody with any sort of knowledge could have been like, hey, you might want to run a different monster set. Like, that monster set's been outdated for fucking years. Like, that's really bad. And so he didn't do that. And then he wanted to put on jabs for the heal, puncturing sweeps for the heal. He wanted to get heals from doing damage. He's running a tank build. He's not doing any damage. When you do no damage and you're getting healed based off the damage that you do, you're not going to get much damage. This is something people figure out 20, 30, 40 hours into PvP. And they're like, oh yeah, this is probably not a good thing to do. It looks like he never fucking played before, guys. Like, that's terrible. Him being bad at PvP is one thing, right? Like, that, I don't care about that. But the fact that you don't understand what sets are good, how are you supposed to know how are you supposed to make good balance changes if you don't know what sets are good and what sets are bad? How are you supposed to understand the intricacies of how a sorcerer is played and how burst combinations work and these sorts of things for all these different classes if you don't understand core fundamentals of your game? It doesn't make any sense. Like, it was really bad. I went back and I watched JTK's video where he covered it, and I read some of the comments, and the comments were highly amusing. Zash here says, this event has shed light on why we get patches we get. Lead combat dev is absolutely clueless. A lead PvP dev not knowing how to play his own game definitely worries me about the state of the ESO. The lead developer of PvP and combat in general should be working at least an hour or two a week on, I don't know, combat, he looked like he had never played the game in his life. Kind of a slap in the face when for the last few years, players have been complaining about tank heal bots, and the combat lead dev keeps talking about playing a tank heal bot to be an annoyance to players. Out of touch. Don't care about his skill. He didn't know heavy attacks restored resources. He has no understanding of the game. Lead combat dev. Edit. The build Brian Wheeler used is actually a Zynode build. The Conscriptor PvP build. Explains a lot. Dude got a PvP build from a PvE player. I'm not here to shit on Zynode, but anybody that looks at Zynode's builds, his PvP builds, they know that they're not good. They're not optimized. And Zynode doesn't care. You know, he puts stuff on his website all the time. And he's like, yeah, all sets are equal. You don't know what's good and what's bad. Yeah, you do. Yes, you do. If I'm making a damage build, I'm not going to run tank sets. Not every set is built equally. And so with that basic understanding that not all sets are built for damage and not all sets are built for defense, there are some sets that are built better for different things. And Troll King in 2024 is a bad set. Oakensoul is not a good set anymore. I mean, it's fine if you don't know what you're doing, which is maybe why Brian Wheeler leaned into it, whatever. But regardless, this is the last video I did on ESO. I talked about how they banned somebody on the forums for talking about how they get into negative feedback loops. Like they're asking for constructive criticism. And what one of my friends said was how they don't listen to players. And they don't listen to players, and they don't listen to feedback, and they end up banning players from the game that try to provide this criticism, and they only listen to yes men. They only listen to people that agree with them. And what ends up happening is they get in these negative feedback loops, and they only listen to players that say everything's going great, and they don't listen to anything else. This is a perfect example. There have been PvP players that have tried to do constructive criticism about the game for years. They have tried to. They've tried to provide feedback. They've tried to do these things. That's why Cypher left. Cypher was trying to do it years ago. Fangarush was trying to do it. Lefty Lucy, like players years ago. Players, I was trying to do it. Other players have tried to do it. They don't listen to anybody. And the players they do listen to are yes men that say everything good and everything is good and everything's going great. And they get in a negative feedback loop to where they go, hey, everything is going great. I should copy a build from the person that says that everything's going great. And they get stuck with just shitty builds because they don't understand what's going bad in their game. They don't understand that he would have looked a lot better if he was running better sets. He really would have. His same skill included. If he ran better sets, he would have looked better, but he didn't. And he looked even worse, and it looked childish. And they ended up deleting the footage. They deleted the footage because it looked so bad. And so now they're coming out here with these jangly keys in front of your face, telling you about how great 2025 and beyond is going to be. Meanwhile, by the way, guys, here's some of the ideas we're working on, some of which you may see on the live servers as tests in 2025 and beyond. You may see these changes, guys. You may in 2025 and beyond, meaning that you may see this in 2026. You may see this in 2027. So all these wonderful, fanciful, fantastic changes may be tests in 2025. You know what this means? Optimism overload, baby. Time to recharge that credit card. Load up on some ESO Plus. Maybe pay for some seasons for the next year, for the next 2 years, for the next 24 months. ESO Plus is only $15 a month, guys. That's over $150 a year to pay for ESO Plus. Okay? And then you can pay for seasons. And in 2 years, everything will magically be better this time. It wasn't, it wasn't that way in 2022, and it wasn't that way in 2020 and 2021 and in 2018 and 2016. But this time's different, guys. This time's different. That's why I'm done. This is why I'm done. I wish everybody that still continues to play this game the best. You guys deserve better. You guys deserve way better than to have the creative director lie to your face every single year. You deserve way better than to have the lead combat dev not understand how to play their game. You deserve better to have this entire development team ignore you for a fucking decade. And then when they finally change their monetization process, they decide that they actually need you now. They've ignored you, but now they need you. No, they don't need you. They need your money, you. They need your money. If they actually liked you and thought about you, they would throw a little bit of money towards, having an in-game event or an in-person large event to celebrate, everybody that's stuck through it. Dealt through the ups and downs of ESO, but they don't want to do that. They want your money. New seasons. Let's go. That's the end of the video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please provide in the section below. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a nice day.